October 1939, Scapa Flow, Orkney Islands, the most heavily defended naval anchorage on Earth, home of the Royal Navy's home fleet since 1914, 120 square miles of sheltered water, ringed by islands, guarded by booms, nets, minefields and sunken blockships. No enemy vessel had ever penetrated Scapa Flow. No enemy vessel ever could. That was the assumption. At 0104 on October 14, a single German torpedo struck HMS Royal Oak on her starboard bow. The crew blamed an internal explosion. Many went back to sleep. 20 minutes later, 3 more torpedoes hit amidships. Royal Oak rolled over and sank in 13 minutes. 835 men and boys died, many of them teenagers, inside the safest anchorage in the British Empire. A lone U-boat had done what the entire German high seas fleet never managed, and Joseph Goebbels was about to turn one submarine commander into the most famous man in Germany. To understand how this happened, you need to understand what HMS Royal Oak actually was by 1939. She was a Revenge-class battleship, one of 5 sisters laid down during World War I. Launched at Devonport in 1914, commissioned in 1916, she arrived just in time for Jutland. Her main armament was 8 15-inch Mark I guns in 4 twin turrets, super-firing pairs fore and aft. Each shell weighed nearly a ton. Her armour belt was 13 inches of Krupp-cemented steel amidships, tapering to 4 inches at the bow and stern. Deck armour over the magazines had been increased to 5 inches during a 1934-36 refit, with 3.5 inches over the engine rooms. Secondary armament included 6-inch casemate guns and twin 4-inch anti-aircraft mountings. 2 octuple 2-pounder pom-pom mounts provided close-range defence. Parsons direct-drive turbines on 4 shafts produced 40,000 horsepower. Standard displacement sat around 28,000 long tons, rising to over 33,000 at full load. Overall length was roughly 620 feet, beam 88.5 feet. On paper, a formidable warship. In reality, she was obsolete. The Revenge class had been designed for 23 knots. By 1939, Royal Oak could barely manage 20, too slow to operate with the modern fleet, too narrow in the beam to be reconstructed without crippling her stability. Winston Churchill himself dismissed the Revenge class as spent forces. Her only remaining job was sitting at anchor inside Scapa Flow, serving as a floating anti-aircraft battery. She carried 1,234 crew on her final night, including 163 boy sailors, some as young as 15. Now consider the anchorage itself. Scapa Flow had 7 or 8 passages between surrounding islands that needed defending. The 3 main entrances, Hoxha Sound, Hoy Sound, and Swither Sound, had proper defences: booms, anti-submarine nets, shore batteries. The eastern channels were a different story. 4 narrow gaps between mainland and South Ronaldsay relied entirely on blockships, vessels sunk during World War I to obstruct passage. 2 decades of tidal action had reduced these to rusted hulks with gaps between them. A 1938 survey found Kirk Sound contained a clear passage 300 to 400 feet wide. In June 1939, Admiral Sir Wilfrid French navigated Kirk Sound personally in a small boat and concluded a submarine could transit at slack water. He warned the Admiralty immediately. Admiral Sir Charles Forbes forwarded the warnings, writing that he could not be free from constant anxiety unless the channels were properly blocked. The Admiralty agreed in July to sink 3 additional blockships. Bureaucratic delays over costs meant the work was never finished. SS Lake Neuchâtel, the vessel earmarked for Kirk Sound, was still afloat on the night of October 13. It was not sunk until October 21, 1 week too late. Commodore Karl Dönitz conceived what he called Special Operation P within days of war's outbreak. His objectives were double. First, displace the home fleet to weaken Britain's North Sea blockade. Second, symbolic revenge at the exact site where the German high seas fleet had been scuttled in humiliation on June 21, 1919. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilot named Siegfried Knemeyer overflew Scapa Flow on September 26th, producing photographs that revealed both the defensive gaps and the ships at anchor. Dönitz studied the imagery and identified Kirk Sound as the entry point. On October 1, he summoned Kapitän-Leutnant Günther Prien, offered him the mission with full freedom to refuse, and gave him 48 hours to study the charts. Prien was 31 years old. a former merchant marine officer who joined the German Navy in 1933. He commanded U-47, a Type 7B submarine displacing 753 tons surfaced, 857 tons submerged. She measured 218 feet in length. 4 bow torpedo tubes, 1 stern tube, 14 torpedoes. Twin diesel engines gave her 17.2 knots on the surface. Electric motors pushed 8 knots submerged. Maximum diving depth was roughly 720 feet, a crew of 44. The boat departed Kiel on October 8 and approached Orkney on the night of October 13, chosen for its high spring tide, new moon, and slack water window. At 23:31, Prien began his surface transit through Kirk Sound, threading between the sunken blockships. He briefly ran aground on a cable, freed the boat, was momentarily caught in the headlights of a taxi on shore. The driver did not raise an alarm. Overhead, the aurora borealis cast light that Prien had not expected. At 00:27 on October 14, U-47 entered the Anchorage. The harbour was nearly empty. Most capital ships had been dispersed after a recent sortie. But Prien spotted Royal Oak 4,400 yards to the north. At 00:58, he fired 3 torpedoes from his bow tubes. A 4th jammed. One hit the starboard bow at 0104. It severed the anchor chain with a sharp crack and shook the ship. Officers investigated and concluded the forward paint store had exploded. No alarm was raised. Many crew returned to their hammocks. Prien could not believe his luck. No searchlights, no patrol boats, no depth charges. He turned U-47, fired a stern torpedo that missed, then spent 20 minutes reloading his bow tubes while creeping back toward Royal Oak. At 0116, he fired a second spread of 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck the starboard side amidships. The results were catastrophic. A magazine detonated. Burning cordite raced through internal compartments. 3 mess decks were destroyed instantly: the stokers, the buoys, and the Royal Marines. All lights failed. Royal Oak heeled to starboard. 15 degrees, then 45. By 0129, she rolled completely over and sank in roughly 100 feet of water. 13 minutes from impact to capsize, Rear Admiral Henry Blagrove, commander of the 2nd Battle Squadron, went down with the ship. He was the first Royal Navy flag officer killed in World War II. His body was never recovered. Of 1,234 aboard, 835 died. Between 126 and 134 of the dead were boy sailors under 18. The majority of those boys perished because their mess decks sat directly above the magazines that exploded. Captain William Benn survived, pulled from the freezing water by the drifter HMS Daisy II, whose skipper John Gatt rescued approximately 386 men in an extraordinary feat of seamanship. Prien escaped through Kirk Sound at 0215. No patrol vessel challenged him. His total time inside Scapa Flow was 1 hour and 48 minutes. The first British destroyer did not slip its mooring until 0330, over an hour after U-47 had cleared the anchorage. If you are finding this analysis of one of the Royal Navy's darkest hours compelling, subscribing helps the channel and ensures you do not miss the next one. Now, what happened next transformed a military operation into Germany's greatest propaganda triumph of the war. U-47 reached Wilhelmshaven on October 17th. Hitler sent his personal aircraft to fly Prien and his crew to Berlin. On October 18th, at the Reich Chancellery, Hitler personally awarded Prien the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. It was the first such decoration given to any Kriegsmarine officer. Every crew member received the Iron Cross second class. That evening, a massive celebration at Berlin's Wintergarten Theatre was broadcast live on national radio. Prien appeared with his wife. The audience rose. The public donated 50,000 Reichsmarks. Hans Fritzsche, Germany's most prominent radio commentator, delivered multiple broadcasts shaping the narrative. In one titled German Torpedoes in Scapa Flow, he used the sinking to question the entire strength of the British fleet. In another titled Churchill's Stubborn Silence, he mockingly asked whether Mr. Churchill had expected a German submarine inside his most secure harbour. The constructed story was multi-layered. David versus Goliath. A lone submarine versus the world's greatest naval fortress. Daring German heroism versus British complacency. And historical revenge at the site of the 1919 scuttling, where the surrendered German fleet had been interned and then scuttled in defiance of the victors. Goebbels made certain every German understood the symbolism. The place where Germany had been humiliated was now the place where Britain had been humiliated. A ghost-written autobiography appeared within weeks, selling 750,000 copies despite containing significant fabrications, including a dramatic fictional escape scene. Prien himself was reportedly furious when he received the manuscript, telling associates he was an officer, not a film star. The changes were never incorporated. Postcards bearing Prien's face circulated across the Reich. The snorting bull painted on U-47's conning tower became the emblem of the entire 7th U-boat flotilla. German newsreels played the footage of Prien meeting Hitler in cinemas across the country for weeks. One German schoolboy later recalled that enthusiasm for Prien could only be compared with Britain's love for Admiral Nelson. Prien continued as one of Germany's top U-boat aces, eventually sinking 30 ships totalling approximately 162,000 gross register tons, plus Royal Oak. U-47 was lost with all 45 hands in March 1941. The Nazi government concealed his death for 10 weeks, an implicit testament to the propaganda value his celebrity still held. Why did no other British loss match this as propaganda? HMS Hood, sunk by Bismarck in May 1941 with only 3 survivors from 1,418 crew, was a far greater symbolic blow. But the Royal Navy hunted Bismarck down and sank her 3 days later. The story became one of British revenge, not German triumph. HMS Glorious, sunk with over 1,500 dead in June 1940, was swallowed by the fall of France. HMS Barham exploded spectacularly in November 1941, but Germany did not even know the ship had sunk. The Admiralty suppressed the news for months, denying Goebbels any opportunity. Only Royal Oak combined every element: a daring achievement, deep historical symbolism, perfect timing at the war's outset, a charismatic hero sustained as a propaganda asset, total British humiliation with no mitigating counter-narrative, no revenge, no redemption, the embarrassment forced action. Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, told Parliament the attack had been a remarkable exploit of professional skill and daring. That concession itself became German propaganda material. The Board of Inquiry discovered 11 possible submarine routes into Scapa Flow still open. Junior officers had complained the base was unsafe, only to be ignored by senior leadership. Admiral French, the very officer who had warned about Kirk Sound, was censured and placed on the retired list, a decision historians have judged deeply unjust. The Home Fleet abandoned Scapa Flow entirely, dispersing to Loch Ewe and Rosyth. Capital ships did not return until March 1940, nearly 5 months later. Churchill drove the reconstruction personally. By March 1940, restored defences included additional blockships, controlled minefields, submarine detection loops, coast defence batteries, 88 heavy anti-aircraft guns, 100 searchlights, 80 barrage balloons, radar stations and fighter squadrons. But the most enduring response was the Churchill barriers, 4 massive concrete causeways permanently sealing the eastern approaches. Construction began in May 1940. Over 1,300 Italian prisoners of war provided the labour from early 1942 onward. The engineering was formidable: 2.3 kilometres of causeway across 4 barriers, maximum water depth of 59 feet, 250,000 tonnes of rock and 66,000 concrete blocks. The barriers were completed by September 1944 and officially opened on May 12, 1945, 4 days after Victory in Europe Day. They remain in use today as road links between the islands. No enemy vessel ever penetrated Scapa Flow again. October 1939, Scapa Flow. A 25-year-old battleship too slow to fight, anchored in a base defended by rotting hulks that 3 admirals had warned about, destroyed by a single submarine that spent nearly 2 hours inside the harbour without challenge. 835 men died, including over 120 boys, because peacetime bureaucratic delays left a 400-foot gap in the blockships. Prien's feat was genuine bravery and superb seamanship, but it was also a catastrophic failure of British institutional complacency. The warnings were clear. The intelligence was available. The solutions were known. The Admiralty simply did not act in time. British naval excellence has always included the willingness to learn from its worst failures. The Churchill barriers stand as proof. Built from the wreckage of that October night, they sealed Scapa Flow permanently and ensured the Royal Navy's most humiliating lesson was never repeated. The specifications demanded it, the 835 dead required it, and the concrete causeways that still carry traffic across the Orkney tides, 80 years later, confirm it.